Okay, so big things happened overnight. I barely slept overnight. There was so much going on. It is an exciting time to be alive, folks. So, what we're witnessing is a mercenary rebellion happening in Russia. Um, I wanted to start this out. I feel it's important to help people understand what the risks of having a mercenary company, having independent mercenaries fighting for you are. Um, there's a reason why mercenaries fell out of favor uh, in the Western world starting in the late, I would say in the early Renaissance period. Um, in the late medieval period, throughout the Middle Ages, mercenary armies were used, and sometimes they were useful, sometimes they were not so useful, sometimes they weren't reliable, sometimes they ran amok, and a lot of times they betrayed their clients that they were supposedly working for various reasons, due to contract disputes and so on and so forth. So, generally speaking, if a warlord, a duke, a baron could levy enough troops of his own directly under his command, loyal knights and subservient peasants, they would do so. But as things progressed into the high Middle Ages in Europe, it became necessary, especially in places like in Italy and other places, it became necessary for mercenaries to be hired. Italy was a very common place because what you had in Italy was a lot of Italy was very fragmented at the time. You had like Tuscany, you had the papacy, you had all of these merchant republics with patricians and merchant princes. You had a lot of stuff going on in Italy. It was very fragmented, very chaotic, and a lot of these little kingdoms, they had a lot of money. Italy was very rich, but they didn't have a lot of manpower to spare to waste on wars, between warlords and merchant princes. So what they tended to do in Italy was hire mercenaries. Mercenaries became very popular. Even the Pope especially, tended to hire a lot of mercenaries, and that was both a blessing and a curse. The thing about mercenaries is they can be very useful until they stab you in the back. And what happened in Italy is, a lot of these mercenaries tended to run amok, and oftentimes, instead of working to further the interests of a client that was hiring them, they often struck out on their own, especially if they didn't have a contract to fulfill. If they didn't have a contract from somebody, what they tended to do was to go pick a fight somewhere. And oftentimes these mercenary companies led by, in Italy, they started to call these guys condo. I don't know how you would say this in Italian. I'm just going to say it like you would say it in Spanish because I understand Spanish. Condottieri, or condottieri would be the plural. So if like a mercenary captain, these mercenary captains became politically powerful in their own right because of all the money they were making and because they had an army at their disposal, a well-trained, well-equipped, highly disciplined army. And these guys were smart tacticians. They would do everything in their power to prevent needless losses, oftentimes engaging in these basically maneuver contests without actually fighting. You would have in Italy two different mercenary armies, and what they would do is they would just maneuver against each other like they were playing a game of chess and do very little fighting. And eventually one would give up, like, you got me, checkmate, and he would retreat because he didn't want to, waste his valuable soldiers. So you had this sort of stuff going on. But these condottieros became very powerful in their own right, and they actually contributed to the chaos that was medieval and early Renaissance Italy, and kept it they actually kept it rather chaotic. Whereas in other parts of Europe, like England and France, because they weren't as dependent upon mercenaries, because they were able to levy a lot more troops, you didn't see as much of this chaos on the part of the as much of this chaotic behavior on the part of mercenary companies running amok. So you had a lot of that. So then you start seeing over time in Italy these warlords, as they consolidated their power and became, grew their power base and became more influential. They would sort of semi-nationalize these mercenary companies. They would say, okay, you're still a mercenary company, but you're only working for me. I'm going to pay you, and you're just going to work for me. All right, I'll just keep paying you, right? So that sort of thing happened, and that eventually led, because you don't want an army that is independent of the chain of command of the power structure. That leads to problems, and that's what's going on in Russia right now. So what happened in Europe is you had these warlords eventually start, as they became more powerful, they said, okay, I don't know if I am comfortable with you being independent, so how about I just hire you and I make you my personal army? So these mercenary companies became kind of semi-nationalized. And then as we go into the 1600s and 1700s, especially when nationalism starts to come up in 1700s and 1800s, you start to see mercenaries be dropped altogether in favor of national standing armies that had a direct chain of command to the head of state. Because what happens when you have an independent army in your employ is you get into a situation where you have, if that independent army attains notoriety within a society, that can be a big problem for the, establishment that's in power at the time. You don't want that. So that seems to be what happened with Wagner Group. Now, to give a little backstory of what I can remember off the top of my head, having followed this pretty closely and having the historical context to understand this. You had the Battle of Bakhmut, and around February, Prighozin starts, the head of Wagner. He's kind of like the public face of Wagner. He's not really the commander of Wagner, so to speak. He's kind of like the CEO of Wagner, but he's not like, he doesn't do, well, he's generally not supposed to do actual battlefield operational command. But Wagner has been around for a while. Wagner was created by is an experiment of sort, created by the Russians to allow the Russians to deploy forces overseas, kind of like we do with the special forces. A lot of people compare them to the French Foreign Legion, but I would argue they're even more independent and outside of the power structure of the French Foreign Legion, in a sense. But they are similar, and they're there to give Russia a means to deploy forces outside of the country while still complying with their constitution. Because, believe it or not, Russia has a very strict constitutional requirements for sending their military into external engagements. That's kind of why this is still called a special military operation in Russia. So the Wagner were created. They were very useful in Syria. They kind of filled the role of what our covert ops special forces would do in our Green Berets would be. They kind of filled that role, and I'm not an expert on them, but so anybody can add to what I'm saying. But they're a private military company. They exist outside of the regular military chain of command. And so what happens is Wagner is tapped, I would say is a better word. Wagner is tapped to really lead the fight in Bakhmut, which was this pretty large, long, grueling, bloody battle that was just basically won by Russia back in March, early April. And Wagner started to, ever since really last year, Wagner started to gain a lot of notoriety in Russia and popularity in Russia because of this battle. The Battle of Bakhmut started back in August. I don't even know if I could find Bakhmut on this map. Let's bring the map out. So, yeah, there goes Bakhmut. So that's where if in case somebody doesn't know, that's the Battle of Bakhmut. And the Prighozin, obviously he liked the cameras, and he spent a lot of time talking to the media. That was kind of his job in the first place, but he seemed to show a special liking to being on TV and to being the center of attention, and the media started to pay a lot more attention to him, and he had this certain persona about him. He put on a certain persona that appeals to the Russian sensibility. Let's just put it that way. But around February, he started to fly off the handle. And a lot of people speculate about why, what was going on there. People wonder, does he have some sort of political ambitions? I mean, he is a very rich man. He's already a billionaire. So, a lot of billionaires have political ambitions. He seemed to spend a lot of time really in Bakhmut for someone who is kind of a CEO and not a tactical commander. He seemed to spend a lot of time in Bakhmut on the front. I think really based on what I've seen, especially his off-the-wall video he did in which he, showed a bunch of dead soldiers lying on the grass in Telegram, and he's got this crazy look in his eyes, and he's screaming at the camera, yelling at Shoigu. He seemed to have lost it. So I think he's probably suffering from a fair bit of PTSD. He's not a trained soldier. He never was. He was a chef, and he planted himself in one of the bloodiest battles in the history of the world since World War II, and he was there by all accounts, and I think he suffered from some PTSD as a result of this. And he was complaining about various things. He was saying that he wasn't being given enough ammunition and his soldiers were dying as a result, and he would kind of be all over the place. I think he also was kind of upset with the pace of the battle and the war. He said that many times. He's been upset with the restraint on the part of the Ministry of Defense, and especially Putin. Although he's always careful not to criticize Putin, because don't bite the hand that feeds you, sort of things. Until today, but he's just been all over the place. I think PTSD has something to do with it. I think political ambition has something to do with it. There was what was another thing? I'm going to pause it for a second, see if I could think about this other issue that they had. So towards the end of the battle, as we know, as you may remember, there was even more drama. I think Prighozin at one point threatened to just withdraw his troops. and give the town back to the Ukrainians. And then he said, "Okay, we'll stay until the end," and they stayed. And then once Bakhmut was secured, they quickly took Wagner out of combat and put them in sort of a rear position. Let me see if I could find it. So Bakhmut is here. So I think they sent the Wagner over here in this area, and they've been there ever since like the middle of April, basically resting and recuperating. I'm sure some of these men went back to their families. So I'm not even sure, and I don't think many people are sure exactly how many troops are at this camp. It certainly wasn't the entire. I doubt it was the entire force. But anyway, they were chilling here for like a month and a half. And Prighozin continued to go on television saying off-the-wall things, basically being insubordinate. Criticizing especially the Ministry of Defense. He seems to have some deep-seated hostility towards Shoigu, who is the Minister of Defense and a trusted advisor of Putin. He's always careful. He's always been careful to assure people that he likes Putin, and I think him and Putin have some sort of relationship, business relationship. They've been known to spend time together and all this. And also what was going on was the contract for Wagner Group, because it is a private military company, was being negotiated, the renewal of the contract. And I guarantee you, a lot of people point this out, and I don't have any proof of this, but I can almost guarantee you that there's some. I do know that the contract is being negotiated as it does every year or 2 years or whatever the case may be, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were trying to kind of push Prighozin out of the picture and renew Wagner in a way that would, get Prighozin out of the picture and, all that. Because, one thing you have to remember in military history is when you have a general, especially a general of an independent mercenary company, but this would apply to a general within the chain of command of the regular army as well, but more so to like a general of an independent company. And they're notable and popular, as Prighozin has been. Wagner has been very popular in Russia, very revered in Russia. And you got this guy flying off the handle. It's not a good idea to tolerate that. Because generally speaking, a guy with an army behind him is only going to get bolder the more you try to brush off, his insubordination. And that's what's happened here. He just continued to get more and more insubordinate. He has his own private army that is loyal to him somewhat. I don't know how much. I mean, there's different claims about how many. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's just finish the background. So, the day before yesterday, he goes on TV again like he does every other day, and he says all this really wild shit. This war is all about money, and Russia just invaded Ukraine for money, and I don't even believe that. I mean, I'm not necessarily one to agree with everything Russia does, but it's obvious that Russia had to do something about Ukraine. It's kind of like what the United States had to do during the Cuban Missile Crisis, okay? It's no different. Russia had to do something about that. It's very simple. But he made all these accusations, again, primarily focusing his criticism towards Shoigu, the Ministry of Defense, General Gerasimov. So he's got some beef there. Again, probably, I'm guessing, political ambitions. He certainly loves to be in front of the cameras. And then, he makes some crazy video yesterday and says we're going to take over Russia, more or less, in not so many words. So, from what I understand, what he did is he took 2 detachments of forces from somewhere in western Ukraine. I'm guessing over here in this area. And I'm guessing somewhere over here, might be a little north. He sent one down this way to M4, and they proceeded to Rostov-on-Don. Okay? Now, Rostov-on-Don is actually like the functional headquarters of, Russian operations in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, Shoigu's office, and I don't know about Gerasimov, but Shoigu and several other high-level commanders and officials were here, and here comes. They may have went down this highway with one of these detachments. Now, I've heard so many different accounts of how many forces were actually in this convoy. I've heard the convoy was 50 kilometers long. I find that hard to believe. I've heard other people say that only 1,000 troops and a few vehicles went this way. I don't know. And then he sends another detachment over here, straight across. Let me see where he's at. So, here's I-4. I guess right now they're here. So I guess they sent another force up this way, maybe up this road, and they go up this highway towards this city right here. And that detachment of Wagner, I guess, I don't believe Prighozin is in this convoy. And they're going up to this city on their way to the big kahuna, Moscow. And so they're well on their way. My understanding is, as of the recording of this video, it's about 9 a.m. on the East Coast. They're around here, maybe in this general area somewhere. So there's that. So my understanding is Prighozin is down here. He's holed up in the former, now commandeered headquarters. I think it's the headquarters of the Southern Army or something down here. They occupied and took this over without a fight. Allegedly, there's so many allegedlys going on. They shot down a helicopter or 2 or 3 on the way. I haven't seen any proof of that. What's going on in Rostov-on-Don is interesting, by the way, that now. So we have a lot of videos coming out of Rostov-on-Don. And people apparently, let's get a video here. People are starting to get pissed at the Wagner soldiers. So I don't think this is going over well with the civilians. So this could be. So there's basically civil unrest going on. People are kind of pissed off, wondering what's going on. I've seen multiple videos of people being, detained, not really harshly, but this can be a very tense situation. This can turn out really bad really quick. I haven't seen loads and loads of any pictures with loads and loads of troops or vehicles here, so Armchair Warlord over here, I don't know if I can find it now, but Armchair Warlord was saying he thinks there's only like 1,000 troops maybe in Rostov-on-Don or so. Maybe that's a little low, but it can't be more than 1,000 or 2,000. And then apparently there are reports that the Chechens are heading that way as well. So there's that going on. So there's a lot going on right now. Is this the picture of the Chechens? Wagner. go to Moscow in wagons. These are the Wagner. So this is the interesting thing about it is Prighozin yesterday and overnight was saying, "Oh, this is not a mutiny. This is a peace march, and we're just gonna, occupy this building, and he's saying like, I want Shoigu and Gerasimov or whoever else he has a problem with to come here and we'll settle this. And presumably he wants Shoigu fired, or I don't, so there's that. And then you have this convoy going up to Moscow. Now, I've already seen video. I can't really vouch for any of these videos, but I already saw a video somewhere. Probably War Monitor has it. See, this is raw stuff. You have them with these, I guess that's like a 20 millimeter looking sort of cannon on the back of a pickup truck. Nothing too spectacular. You got them. This is the Wagner people mining the roads going into Rostov-on-Don. Very irresponsible, by the way. Here's them, I guess, detaining people. They're claiming that Putin left Moscow. That's supposedly Putin's jet, but then Putin and the Russians, the Russian ministry denies that. Somewhere up here, Akhmat. Here's supposedly these are the Chechens. They're going to Rostov, and so these are the Chechens. They're going to Rostov. I've seen several pictures of Chechens going to Rostov. Kadyrov says he's supporting Putin or whatever. So there's that. So there's a lot going on. What's intel? There was a picture somewhere. There was one video I saw allegedly of an airstrike on this, like apparently a Russian airstrike on the caravan or convoy, whatever you want to call it, that's heading to Moscow. So apparently they're already past here. And they're just motoring up, and apparently there's already been airstrikes and attacks on the convoy here. So there's that. So I just don't know how big this group of Wagner soldiers that decided to go along with this are. In reality, the coup, as they want to call it, which it kind of is, it's a mutiny to be more precise. It's not going to go anywhere, but it doesn't matter if it goes anywhere. It's going to look bad no matter what Putin does. If he, if a lot of Wagner soldiers die, it's not going to look good. It's gonna, if they manage to cause more chaos, it's not gonna look good. It's a PR disaster, and the Western, after the brilliant tactical and operational victories that we just saw with the Ukrainian counteroffensive, this mutiny essentially erases all of that in the information warfare space, and it's going to embolden the NATO countries to continue to support Ukraine. They needed something. I don't know, and a lot of people suspect Western intelligence might have been behind this. Maybe Prighozin was kind of turned by Western intelligence. There was some story a few months ago that I don't know if I didn't find the story credible, but the story was that Prighozin offered Ukraine something in return for something, and I don't know what, but there was like some sort of deal being made between Ukrainian forces and Prighozin. There was that story. It was being spread by the British media, so take that with a grain of salt. I didn't find it credible. I think that, of course, the United States will, State Department and intelligence agencies will let the idea run that they had something to do with it. I think it was entirely organic. Personally, I think this was entirely organic. Now, a lot of people in Russia are going to think the United States was behind this as well. But I think just having watched this over the past really 8, 9 months, 10 months since the war, since the Battle of Bakhmut started, and Wagner really started to get a lot of notoriety in this particular war. And as the battle commenced, really Wagner was elevated, and Prighozin was elevated as a hero of this battle. And apparently Wagner took a lot of losses. I think they could have taken 10,000 losses easily. And then Prighozin becomes more and more. He already was a public figure, but now he's become really a rock star in the Russian media. And when you have a situation where you have a tale of two generals, one general is outside of the chain of command. He's very popular. He has a powerful force behind him. And then you have the other general who is within the proper regular army, who is respected, but he's not a rock star like the independent mercenary captain. That's always going to lead to problems, and that's why it's been a tendency over history to move away from mercenary companies, and this is an example of the danger of mercenary companies. I think that companies like Blackwater are much more in lockstep with the interests of the deep state, especially I just touched my cord there, especially the CIA. I mean, to me, Blackwater is kind of like an extension of the CIA at this point. They almost exclusively work with the CIA, whereas with Wagner Group, they were much more independent and just more outside of the Russian command structure. Another point of contention, this was what I was trying to remember earlier, is there was this rumor going around during the Battle of Bakhmut that, Prighozin, I believe Bakhmut always accepted convicts, certain convicts, that met their standards, and I like the idea of, a military unit accepting convicts as a form of rehabilitation, even giving them a second chance by serving their country. I have no problem with that. I think that should be done here. It's done in France. The French Foreign Legion does that, essentially. So why can't they do it here? I think it would be great for a lot of people, especially I was going to say for nonviolent criminals, but you're basically making them violent. But, I think that military service would be a good remedy. Used to be used all the time. Go to war, go to jail. But nowadays, they don't want to do that. But so apparently, Prighozin accelerated and increased the use of convicts to get enough people to recruit for the Battle of Bakhmut. And so he was going around to a lot of Russian prisons and recruiting a lot of convicts. And the story is that at some point, I believe at the beginning of this year, the Ministry of Defense got kind of uncomfortable with that. And they said, hey, you got to stop doing that. You got to stop. We don't want you recruiting all these convicts. Now, I'm not sure if that was out of sympathy for the convicts or alarm of what the, public relations repercussions might have been. Or maybe they were concerned that Prighozin was building too big of an army. Which, like I said, going back to the history of mercenaries, this has always been a problem with mercenary companies. Oftentimes, they forget the interests of their client, and they decide, hey, I got an army, I'm popular, the people love me enough that I can just do what I want to do until my clients, the Russian government, or in the case of the condottieros, you got the Pope. I'll tell the Pope to go fuck himself, and I'm going to go take a piece of his land because I can, right? So that happened. That kind of shit happened all the time, and this is an example of it happening again. So, like I said, I don't see it going anywhere, but it's already going to be a very damaging to the Russian war effort. I mean, it almost completely erases all of the public relations victories that stem from the brilliant defense against the very ill-conceived counteroffensive on the part of the Ukrainians. It really just erases all of that. It's a disaster for Russia already, no matter what happens. I mean, Putin has to take care of this decisively, has to be very decisive with this. And, watching his address to the nation this morning, when he talked about the punishment, I can see in his face a bit of sentimentality. And I can tell that it pained his heart that he's going to have to severely punish Prighozin. If not kill him, then put him in jail. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Prighozin outs himself in all of this, or does a suicide by a self-termination by cop sort of thing. But either way, it doesn't matter. The Western media is already all over this, and we're going to hear nothing but this for the next week. And the NATO powers are going to go to their summit next month, and they're going to be like, well, now we can send more weapons to Ukraine, more money to Ukraine. We can keep this war going longer. And, at the end of the day, it's going to be just a lot worse for Ukraine and a little worse for Russia. Significantly worse for Russia. And our chances, of actually getting directly involved as Americans has just gone up slightly, believe it or not. That's my takeaway. The chances of the press gangs knocking on the door of your children's house or your house and kidnapping your children from your house to be sent to a war far away has just gone up slightly. The chances of nuclear war has just gone up slightly. Because if this hadn't happened and nothing else happened, NATO summit would have been very divisive next month, and I doubt they would have agreed to supporting Ukraine much more. But now this does it. Now they're going to go all in. Chances of Poles actually getting directly involved just went up. It's not going to make a difference in the long run. It's just going to cause a lot more people to die, but everything just went up. And this goes back to, how a lot of this dispute between Prighozin and the Russian Ministry of Defense has to do with what Prighozin and many Russians perceive as too much restraint on the part of the Ministry of Defense and Putin himself. Most people in Russia want to see Putin be much more aggressive towards Ukraine and would have liked to see the Russians push a lot harder into Ukraine. And Prighozin was one of those. That was really the crux of his complaints, was that, he wasn't able to go as far as he wanted. He wasn't able to attack as hard as he wanted to. And Putin, despite all of the propaganda, the reality is Putin is a moderate in Russian politics. And his whole MO is about, he's a lawyer, and he believes in law. He was a lawyer for the KGB. He wasn't an agent. He wasn't a collector. He was a lawyer. As a lawyer for the KGB, he was in Dresden, so he had to have a cover because, there wasn't officially supposed to be anybody in Dresden from the KGB, right? So he had a cover, but he was just a lawyer. He was just a logistics guy. So he believes in the legal process, and that's why he went through Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, and a lot of people in Russia thought he should have invaded Ukraine a long time ago. And the conduct of the war thus far has been basically a tale of restraint. more than anything else. I mean, let's consider how the United States would handle a similar situation in Mexico. I think if we had an army of Aztec Nazis that were being supplied with nuclear capable missiles in Mexico, and they were being funded by Russia and China and trained, this Aztec Nazi army was being trained by Russia and China, I think we would invade. We would have invaded. We wouldn't have waited 8 years. We would have come up with false pretenses, and we would have carpet bombed the country. That's what we would have done, because that's what we always do. So I think the heart of the mutiny comes down to Prighozin and a lot of people's in Russia's feelings that Putin has been way too moderate. And that's why the idea that, an ouster of Putin, which is not going to happen, but if it did happen, an ouster of Putin right now wouldn't end the war. It would actually escalate the war and make the war a lot worse and a lot more dangerous for all of us in the world. So that's my commentary on it. Very interesting, though. I could barely sleep last night. I was cycling through Twitter, listening to Spaces and all that, and yeah. So that's my spiel on it. I guess I am out.